That'd be fine by me, Mr. Chair.
Please proceed, Representative.
Good afternoon. Chair Nose, Vice Chair Goodwin, and members of the committee. For the record, I am Travis Nelson, representing House District 44, North and Northeast Portland. I'm here today to speak in support of House Bill 4089, a hospital financial transparency bill. This legislation gives taxpayers better insight into how our largely nonprofit hospital system spends and invests their tax dollars. To my knowledge, the hospitals are the only opponents of this bill, and this legislation should have no fiscal. Originally, this bill included provisions that would have forced hospitals to pay non-exempt workers minimum wage for standby, and included a provision that would have mandated more predictability around employee schedules. And after receiving feedback after our last legislative days, I stripped out the two biggest and most expensive provisions of this bill and dramatically narrowed the bill to focus just on hospital financial transparency. Hospitals in our state take in millions of taxpayer dollars to support their operations, largely in the form of Medicaid and Medicare. And for those who don't know, hospitals in Oregon already must report a wide variety of financial data to OHA. Total margin, charity care, operating margin, total operating expense, operating revenue, bad debt expense, net non-operating gains or losses, and other financial data points are already being reported. House Bill 4089 gives taxpayers transparency into the salaries of the highest paid earners within a hospital, and those of us who work for the state are very familiar with that level of transparency. Just in case you are curious, the CEOs of the two largest nonprofit hospitals, Providence and Peace Health, made over $8 million and $5 million each last year. This bill will also require quarterly reporting of days cash on hand, and transparency into days cash on hand will give taxpayers a better understanding of hospital cash flow. This bill will also reveal the flow of profits to and from Oregon. One of the things I've heard from OHA was, we currently don't know how much of the revenue or profits generated in Oregon by a multi-state health system are being sent to Washington State, California, or Alaska to support the operations in the communities there. This bill will also require hospitals to report the percent of Medicaid revenue invested in the stock market, a practice that is perfectly legal. And to be clear, even though I question how it is legal to invest Medicaid dollars into the stock market, I am not saying this practice should stop. I'm simply saying that taxpayers should have a right to know how much hospitals are gaining or losing on those choices. This bill also provides insight into income received from patient care, employee expenses, along with trusts and other assets. This legislation isn't asking hospitals to divulge trade secrets, proprietary information, or intellectual property. It merely aims to create a more comprehensive view of hospital financial performance for the tax-paying public, revealing how hospitals generate revenue and allocate their resources. This legislation will not only give much-needed transparency, but should foster a deeper trust between hospitals and healthcare systems and the communities that they serve. This fosters an environment, in my opinion, where transparency transcends policy to become a practice that cultivates trust and accountability. The bottom line is, for me, do you believe that taxpayers have a right to know how our largely nonprofit hospitals are spending their hard-earned tax dollars? If you agree with me and think they do, then I hope that you would vote yes on House Bill 4089. Thank you.
Committee, is there anybody that has a question for the representative on his bill? Representative Javy, is that a sort you're thinking about it, or is that an actual hand up?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Representative Javy. Then Representative
Thank you,
Tran.
Chair. Rep. Nelson, can you expand more on why quarterly reporting will give more transparency than annual reporting?
Well, there's annual reporting for everything except for days cash on hand. Mr. Chair, Representative Javity, with days cash on hand, that's something that is generally included and a hospital's quarterly financial statement. And so to me, it just made sense to include it quarterly since they are already putting that data out in their financial reports.
Follow up?
Follow-up?
Do you have a specific end point or reason for wanting to know the cash flow and cash days on hand? Why the taxpayers might find that useful?
Well, I think cash on hand shows you from a different perspective how healthy a hospital or healthcare system is, right? Like operating margin gives you one perspective, but you can have, and I've seen this before, where a hospital has an okay operating margin, but they've got 20 days cash on hand. And if we've got hospitals that really do have, 20 days cash on hand, I think that as a state, we should be intervening even if they do have a healthy margin, because if a hospital can only stay open for 20 days, if the cash stopped coming in, that's a big problem.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Travis.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Representative Tran.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rep. Nelson. Can we find the data you're requesting at this moment in your bill somewhere at this time?
Mr. Chair, Rep. Tran, I would say probably 90% of this information can be found. You just have to dig really hard for it. And if you are a member of the general public, it can be very difficult for you to get the information. So like executive salaries are reported on an IRS 990. And if you do enough digging, you can get that information online. Like I stated to Rep. Javity, hospitals put out quarterly financial statements. If you dig deep enough as a consumer, member of the public, you can find those quarterly financial statements. Reporting this data to OHA would just make it much more accessible to members of the taxpaying public.
Thank you.
Anybody else with a question for Representative Nelson? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and call forward. I think they're all here in person. Vonda Abbey, Hannah Winchester, and Lamar Wise.